Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
A dying homeless man found an expensive refrigerator at a garbage dump. But when the vagrant looked inside, he froze in shock at what he saw. A homeless man was dying at the city dump. He didn't want to say goodbye to his miserable life, but he had no choice. Poor nutrition, unsanitary conditions, and an illness, apparently severe pneumonia, were stubbornly bringing him to his end. Yet he had so hoped to live a little longer. And he was still so young, only 32 years old. That's no age at all. But what pained the poor man most wasn't for himself, but for his faithful dog, a large red-haired Rocky, his only friend and companion. "Ah, Rocky, I'm leaving you," the homeless man rasped out between bouts of painful coughing. "Whoa," the dog whined plaintively, as if understanding everything, but then got distracted by fleas and began to frantically scratch his neck with his hind leg, lifting his head to the sky and stretching the corners of his mouth in an ecstatic relief, scratching the itchy spot on his skin. Having finished scratching, he looked at the man, then muttered something sullenly, heavily lay down next to him, and stared into the eyes of his two-legged companion. And so they lay there under a tattered makeshift tent of old tarps, the exhausted vagrant and his shaggy dog. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was someone else's fate, not his. How easily a person can fall, tumble down the social ladder, and crash into the basement so deeply that they break all their bones and can't climb back up. In a previous life, the vagrant's name was Cornelio Morones. He was a decent guy, but he had a knack for trouble. Since childhood, he had gotten into all sorts of mischief. No matter how hard his mother tried to straighten him out, even resorting to corporal punishment, Cornelio grew up to be someone who constantly sought out adventure. And he had an uncanny talent for finding the wrong friends and getting involved in questionable activities. As a teenager, he ended up on the police radar. But that didn't bother him. At least he wasn't locked up. He got by in school, though not without difficulty. He caught on quickly. If he had spent even a little time studying, he would have been an excellent student and the pride of the school. But for a restless, adventurous boy, the meticulous study of subjects was unbearably boring. He was always running somewhere, hurrying, coming up with ideas and inventions. Most of his mental energy was focused on making money. Oh yes, he loved money as much as he loved girls. He quickly realized that where there's money, there are girls, so he had to figure out how to earn it. He was too ashamed to ask his mother for pocket money. Life had already been hard enough on her. Her husband, Cornelio's father, a scoundrel whose name the boy refused to hear in the house, had vanished from their lives, leaving the family with nothing. He was a gambler who couldn't stop until he had lost all their money in cards. After ruining himself and his wife, he quietly disappeared into the sunset, leaving the poor woman to figure out on her own how to climb out of the hole he had dug for her and their son. Since then, the woman and her child wandered from one rented place to another, living in shabby apartments with questionable tenants, and the lion's share of the mother's income went to repaying microloans, the interest on which snowballed. Despite this, the mother tried to stay optimistic, smiled, and never told Cornelio that for the third day in a row, she was eating the cheapest plain pasta at work just to buy him a chocolate bar afterward. In front of her son, and others as well, she tried to keep up appearances and smile, even when she felt an overwhelming urge to jump off the roof. Only at night, when the child was asleep, could she let her tears flow and cry quietly. Cornelio saw this. Sometimes he would wake up and lie still, listening to his mother's quiet sobbing. At such moments, his hatred for his father would erupt within him like a volcano, wishing to incinerate everything connected to that scoundrel. Years later, when the prodigal father, now an alcoholic and down and out, found the son he had abandoned and mumbled through toothless gums, "Son, I'm back," spreading his arms for a hug, Cornelio spat at his feet with contempt, turned around, and walked away. Neither his father's tears nor the curses he shouted in a frenzy, realizing he had lost the last person he could rely on, made Cornelio stop or slow down. Of course, he could have unloaded all his grievances on his father, for abandoning them in poverty, for being the cause of the stroke that took the life of the young woman who still had so much to live for. The years of hard work had worn her down. It was because of that scoundrel that she didn't have a normal life, and Cornelio didn't have a happy childhood. But at that moment, Cornelio felt it was all pointless. His father's personality was destroyed by alcohol. This was no longer the man he once was, just a shell, an avatar. He didn't even look like himself anymore. And who knew what was going on inside him? Besides, his mother had long since passed away. For her sake, he might have destroyed this drunken wreck, but now, everything seemed meaningless. Cornelio never saw his father again. Instead, he started his own family, or at least he had a wife. This happened when he turned 26. By then, he had a car and a small business installing windows. He worked with a partner. The money was good. By this time, Cornelio had more or less settled down and stopped getting involved in shady dealings, though it had even come to petty theft at one point. After high school, he went to college, got by somehow, and didn't get expelled, which was an achievement in itself. Although getting kicked out of a college was hard anyway. There was always a shortage of students in vocational programs, so they didn't expel them until the very last moment. Life after graduation was full of events that could fill an entire novel, but that's beyond the scope of this story. What's important is that Cornelio drifted aimlessly for a while until he finally found something he enjoyed. He liked installing windows. It wasn't boring, and the money was good. At last, he started living like a normal person. His mother hadn't left him any inheritance, so he had to fight his way through life on his own. And finally, he realized that from now on, he didn't have to struggle but could live comfortably. The main thing was not to squander money, though he had a bad habit of doing that. He had a tendency to blow all his money on unnecessary purchases. As they say, showing off was more important than money. For example, he might buy sneakers for an outrageous price when he could find identical ones in style and quality for a third of the price. Or take out a loan for an expensive phone only to pawn it later because he had treated all his friends to a night out at a restaurant at his own expense. Fortunately, over time, Cornelio managed to rein in his spending and began to take money more seriously. He only bought things that were truly necessary and of good quality. He avoided excess in food, consumed alcohol in moderation, and completely stopped going to restaurants. This sensible approach to spending allowed him to buy a car, acquire a decent wardrobe, and finally rent a cozy, albeit small, one-bedroom apartment. It was in this very apartment that his wife, Laura Barros, soon moved in. The young, cheerful girl, slender and flexible, didn't seem to suit this name for some reason. One day, as if from out of nowhere, the endearing nickname Lorita came to him, and Cornelio stuck with it, calling his wife by that name ever since. Lorita didn't mind. Though very attractive, she was a rather simple-minded girl, but she was kind-hearted. Nothing could make her angry or upset. She always looked for the positive in everything. Her father was a reformed tough guy from the 90s who had found his place in the new world but still lived by old principles. "If you hurt her, I'll bury you," he cheerfully promised his future son-in-law on the first day they met, giving Cornelio a hearty slap on the back so hard that it nearly knocked him off his feet. Cornelio had no intention of hurting Lorita. After witnessing his mother's suffering, Cornelio vowed that he would never be the cause of a woman's tears. In general, his attitude towards women was reverent, even somewhat old-fashioned. They say a man opens a car door for a woman in two cases, when the car is new or when the woman is new. Cornelio, however, always opened doors, and if a lady entered the room, he would stand up. So, he couldn't just walk by when he saw two thugs twisting the arms of a skinny, defenseless student on a deserted street late at night. The young girl, with her light, fluffy hair like a dandelion and childishly wide blue eyes, couldn't understand what these two wanted from her. Yes, she had stayed too long at a party and was already worried about getting in trouble with her mother, and now these guys were dragging her to a car. Cornelio couldn't ignore it and stepped in to defend her. He was an athletic guy. In his youth, he and his friends would pass the time on pull-up bars, even learning to perform various tricks, which required strength and preparation. And there had been plenty of street fights too. They didn't brawl in gangs anymore, but conflicts were still often settled with fists. So, Cornelio was confident as he went up against the two thugs alone. He tried to reason with them at first, but words had no effect on the scumbags. He had to use his fists. One punch, two, and the weak, pampered rich boys were helplessly sprawled on the ground near their flashy car, defeated and humiliated. The girl, so frightened and bewildered, ran off at full speed without even saying thank you. Cornelio just smiled. Poor thing, she'd had a scare. It would be a lesson for her. No more wandering around at night without an escort. He turned around and headed home, where a serious conversation awaited him. After all, he had stayed out late himself, and his wife didn't like that. What wife would? Loretta gave him such a scolding and scrambled his brains so much that he completely forgot about the incident. The next morning, as he was having coffee with his now kind wife, who had forgiven him for everything overnight, they heard a loud and insistent knock on their apartment door. Why aren't they calling? Loretta wondered. She went to open the door, and as soon as she did, police officers stormed into the apartment like a hurricane, knocking her off her feet. They restrained Cornelio, slapped handcuffs on him, and even kicked him a couple of times. Without explaining anything, they dragged him out of the apartment, shoved him into a car, and took him away. A bewildered Loretta rushed to call her father. He arrived in a flash to comfort his crying daughter and immediately used all his connections to find out where his son-in-law had been taken. The police were initially reluctant to give him any answers. "This is outrageous," the former gangster yelled, and it truly was a complete outrage. All of this happened because one of the spoiled rich kids Cornelio had knocked out the night before turned out to be the mayor's son. The mayor was furious when he found out what had happened to his child. Cornelio hadn't caused him any serious injuries, just a punch to the solar plexus to knock the wind out of him, but the kid ran crying to his dad, who was all too eager to retaliate. In short, they framed it as if Cornelio had inflicted serious bodily harm on the mayor's son. The mayor had everyone on his side, the judges, the prosecutor, even the medical examination was falsified. What's more, the very student Cornelio had defended in the street came to the trial. What she said as a witness for the prosecution was shocking. She claimed that Cornelio had attacked her, intending to rob her, and that the beaten guys had come to her rescue. She later cried and begged for forgiveness, explaining that they had threatened her and blackmailed her family, and Cornelio forgave her. After all, what could he expect from a small, fragile fish against these predatory, powerful sharks? Everyone was against Cornelio, except for one journalist. She worked for an independent newspaper that was constantly on the brink of being shut down. The paper was barely surviving, and there were constant threats of raids. The city's elites didn't like being exposed, but they couldn't openly eliminate the journalists either. That would have sparked a rebellion among reporters from other cities or even other countries, creating a scandal so large that the mayor's position would be at serious risk. So they tolerated it, but still tried to sabotage them at every turn. This journalist, whose name was Yolanda Balin, somehow miraculously managed to capture photos and videos of the mayor's son at a private party in an exclusive club, where he was dancing around like a lively young colt. He was also clearly under the influence of drugs. This, despite the fact that according to the doctor's reports, he was supposedly bedridden and could barely reach a bedpan, let alone a nightclub. Even more surprisingly, this footage passed verification for authenticity, and Cornelio's lawyer used it in his defense. This helped reduce Cornelio's sentence by a couple of years. They had planned to give him 7 years, but he ended up getting 5. Loretta cried, her father tried to console her, and Cornelio was left clutching his head. 5 years for absolutely nothing, all because of a gross injustice. In the courtroom, he caught the eye of the journalist, a sweet girl with a fair complexion and curly hair, who looked at the poor man with sympathy as he was unjustly stripped of 5 precious years of his life. But it turned out that this wasn't the end of Cornelio's troubles. Before the incident, he had taken out a large loan, not from a bank, though. For some reason, the bank had refused him such a significant loan. However, Cornelio had connections with people who could help. He needed the money to expand his business. There was a lot required initially, but he was confident that he would quickly recover everything. He planned to repay the loan in the shortest time possible since he had everything figured out. But that fateful encounter with the spoiled rich kids ruined all his plans. The money was invested, and the business stalled. His partner tried to manage things, but he was deceived as well, ending up in debt. Cornelio didn't betray his partner, he took the full hit himself. He just hadn't anticipated that those guys would go after Loretta. Loretta was terrified when broad-shouldered thugs barged in and began ransacking the apartment in search of money. They took the television and expensive electronics, but fortunately, she had reliable protection, her father. He had a few conversations and arranged for his daughter to be left alone, ensuring that only Cornelio would be held accountable for the debt. "Sorry, son-in-law, but my daughter means more to me than you," he said, and did everything to ensure that Loretta could start a new life. Cornelio was left completely alone in prison, without money and without a future. He knew that as soon as he was released, he would inevitably fall into the hands of those he owed. And indeed, no sooner had he been freed than he encountered real extortion. But there was absolutely nothing left for them to take. Prison had robbed him of his health and 5 years of his life. He had to start from scratch, but how and with what? Loretta had long since remarried and had a child. She hadn't waited for Cornelio. Her father gave him a little money to get by and said, "Sorry it turned out this way. I can't help you any further." But Cornelio was grateful even for that. He relished his freedom. He ate his fill at a cheap cafe and then slept in a hotel on a good mattress. The next morning, he went to the river. He had desperately missed the forest and the river. There, he could sit, think, and make plans for his life. The partner with whom Cornelio had started the business a few years ago had moved to another city, and they had lost contact. Otherwise, they might have worked together again, but it seemed their paths had diverged. Cornelio tried working as a laborer, but that didn't work out either. They paid him pennies while squeezing him dry, to the point where he felt like a slave. On top of that, the creditors kept pressuring him. He was in a bad place. Despair overwhelmed him. He began drinking periodically, lost his documents, and eventually ended up on the street. With no money for housing, he was chased away from parks and doorways by the police and vigilant citizens. However, the city dump welcomed him warmly and even gifted him a loyal friend, Rocky. The dog happened upon him by chance while Cornelio was trying to heat up some canned food he'd found over a fire. A huge, shaggy dog emerged from the darkness, whining pitifully. "Hungry?" Cornelio asked. The furry guest replied. "Well, all right, let's share dinner like brothers." He fed the stray dog some stew, and in gratitude, the dog extended his front paw and tilted his head. "Oh, what manners! You're a real Rocky," Cornelio laughed. "That's it, I'll call you Rocky." It was then that Cornelio noticed the dog's back leg was injured. It seemed the poor thing had been running from someone, but they managed to hit him with a stick. Poor thing. Who did this to you? The former convict treated the dog as best as he could, but Rocky remained lame and couldn't fully recover. However, he was grateful to the man who had fed him and shown him kindness. Together, they slept in a makeshift tent, ate together, and searched for food together. At first, Cornelio thought the city dump wouldn't be his life forever. He planned to restore his documents, find a job, and everything would be fine. But the stench from his clothes was so nauseating, and he looked so unkempt that not even the garbage collectors wanted to hire him. And Cornelio understood them. At first, the smell of the dump made him sick too, but eventually, he got used to it, and soon realized that he would perish here just like all the old, unwanted things rotting under the rain and sun. He had become completely unnecessary in this life. One day, he got caught in an icy rainstorm. He didn't think it would lead to a painful illness. His lungs had already suffered in prison, so the cold and rain were too much for Cornelio's body to handle. He was sick for a long time, yet still went out to hunt for supplies for himself and Rocky. But one day, he simply couldn't get up. The dog circled around him, whining, but couldn't help. "Looks like it's the end, Rocky. I'm leaving you," the homeless man rasped. The dog whimpered, nudged him with its paw, and ran off, while Cornelio slipped into a sleep filled with delirious hallucinations. He dreamt that he was by the river. He looked around. Sand under his feet, forest on the edges, smelling of pine and resin. He had a fishing rod in his hands. He was about to sit by the shore and meditate. If a fish bit, great; if not, even better, no need to fuss with cleaning and cooking. How nice it was. But he was hungry. No worries, he had a thermos of coffee, a flask of good brandy. And then, as if by magic, there was a grill with shashlik, and the smell was intoxicating. His stomach clenched with the desire to taste the aromatic, grilled meat. Just as he picked up a skewer, he heard impatient dog growling. "Hold on, Rocky. Let it cool down." "You silly dog," Cornelio laughed, slicing the meat off the skewer with a knife. But the dog wouldn't stop. He just kept barking loudly, grabbing Cornelio's arm, and then even bit him. "Ouch!" Cornelio exclaimed, and his shashlik, along with the forest and river, vanished like a ghostly mirage, forcing him to face the harsh reality once again. "What have you done, you rascal?" Cornelio almost cried. "You ruined such a dream. It felt like I had one foot in paradise." Instead of a normal human response, the dog barked so loudly right in Cornelio's ear that it made his head ring. "You're really trying to finish me off," Cornelio winced in pain. "Stop it immediately." But Rocky wouldn't listen. He barked again, then started spinning around anxiously, whining, and when he saw that Cornelio wasn't reacting, he grabbed his sleeve with his teeth and tried to drag him toward the exit. "What's gotten into you, Rocky? I've never seen you like this before," the homeless man groaned. He was tormented by a cough, shivering with chills, and had no strength left to stand. But the dog was persistent. Something was clearly troubling him, and Cornelio had to see what it was. Gathering the last of his strength, Cornelio got up from his worn-out mattress, first on all fours, then crawled out of the tent and somehow managed to stand up. Staggering, he tried to take a step, but it was too difficult, and the exhausted, sick man collapsed back onto all fours. In that moment, he was overcome by such a violent coughing fit that he almost choked. After coughing and catching his breath, he wiped away the tears that had welled up in his eyes with his sleeve and forced himself to rise again, exerting tremendous effort. Rocky stood by patiently, waiting for the man to recover. As soon as Cornelio was up, the dog wagged his tail and dashed forward as fast as his injured leg would allow. "Damn it," the homeless man sighed and trudged after the dog. "Look, if there's nothing interesting, I'm not talking to you anymore," he warned his four-legged friend. It felt to Cornelio as though he was walking forever, though the dog didn't lead him far. When the sick man was completely out of strength, the dog suddenly stopped, sniffed the air, then looked back at his companion before striking the ground with his front paws and darting toward an old refrigerator lying on its side. There, Rocky barked loudly and began to spin around in circles nervously. "You fool," Cornelio sighed wearily. "Do you think that fridge is packed with food?" He waved his hand, intending to walk away, but the dog caught up with him and tugged at his sleeve again. "What do you want from me?" the homeless man grumbled, but he gave in to Rocky's persistence and approached the discarded household appliance. "All right, let's see," Cornelio said, puzzled as he noticed the straps and ropes carelessly tied around the refrigerator. Why did they do this? Probably to keep it from opening, or else something might fall out. But what? Pulling a knife from his pocket and sweating profusely, Cornelio once again exerted immense effort to cut through the straps and ropes. But as soon as he did, the refrigerator door swung open, and a lifeless body of a young man tumbled out right at his feet. Cornelio was so weakened by illness that he didn't even flinch. He just stood there, frozen. But Rocky let out a loud yelp and bolted. "Some hero you are," the homeless man weakly muttered. "You dragged me here, and then you ran off." Cornelio wasn't afraid of dead bodies, but he was curious, so he decided to examine the body. The dead man appeared to be in his early 30s, thin, dressed well, with expensive, branded sneakers, his head covered in cuts and bruises. It was obviously a murder. They wouldn't have stuffed him into a refrigerator if he had died of natural causes. Unlikely. The unfortunate vagrant wasn't afraid that the murder might be pinned on him. He had nothing to lose, so he boldly left his fingerprints on the body. He patted the dead man's pockets and found something hard, a wallet. Not expecting to find anything, Cornelio opened it and his eyes widened in surprise. Inside was a significant amount of money, as well as some plastic cards. Wow, he breathed, feeling an inexplicable surge of energy. One of the cards had the name Rollo Velarde on it. Tough luck for you, Rollo, Cornelio sighed with genuine sympathy and continued his search. Suddenly, he came across a mobile phone. It was just a basic button phone, the kind hardly anyone used anymore, especially not young people. The screen was cracked and covered in blood, so Cornelio immediately tossed it aside. It was worthless. The dead man had nothing else of value, so Cornelio decided to leave him. He thought about calling the police, but no, he'd had enough dealings with the police. They'd find the body eventually, and if they didn't, what did it matter to him, Cornelio? Did anyone care about him when he was rotting in prison, or starving, or gasping for breath from coughing? Did anyone bring him medicine? Only that flea-bitten, lame dog had stayed by his side. No, let fate decide the poor man's fate. Cornelio had his own problems. The only thing Cornelio did was cover Rollo's remains with some nearby junk. Then he started to walk away, planning to have some tea by his tent and then go back to sleep. Just as he was about to leave, a shrill melody suddenly sounded from somewhere below, catching his attention. What is that? Looking around, the man noticed the phone he had discarded. The screen was glowing through the cracks and bloodstains, and the phone was nervously vibrating on the ground. Overcoming his disgust, Cornelio, without really understanding why, carefully picked up the phone with 2 fingers and pressed the button with the green phone icon. Yes. Hello, good afternoon, said a voice that clearly belonged to a young man. Are you going to pick up your order? I've been waiting here for an hour. What order? From the computer store. I've been calling you, but you didn't answer. Brilliant ideas had never come to Cornelio so quickly before. And what address did you go to? He asked. Well, Central Street, 53. You live in the penthouse, right? This is your address, isn't it? I've delivered to you before. You always gave me good tips. Listen, man, Cornelio sighed. I've been really swamped, so maybe you should just cancel the order. What? But you already paid. Oh, did I? Well, then just keep it for yourself. No, I can't do that. Well, then come back in a few days, all right? Cornelio suggested. Sure, no problem. Just don't file a complaint against me, okay? Of course not. Don't worry, man, replied the homeless man, and he hung up. Only now did he realize that he had been talking to the courier almost without coughing. In fact, he felt a surge of energy, as if he had won some mystical lottery, and it was as if the guy in the fridge had died in his place today. Cornelio resolutely headed back to his tent. He knew what he needed to do. From beneath a pile of junk, he pulled out a small hiking backpack. He took out a pair of jeans, sneakers, and a jacket. It was relatively decent clothing. Of course, the smell of the dump, which had soaked into his unkempt hair and scraggly beard, would give him away. And his weathered, red skin was a sad testament to his dire condition. After changing into the clothes, he packed a few belongings into the backpack and then whistled loudly, calling for Rocky. Seeing the dog slowly emerge from behind a pile of construction debris, Cornelio headed to his stash. There, in an improvised garage made of boards and plastic sheeting, stood an electric scooter. This marvel had been gifted to him by another vagrant after Cornelio had saved him from a gang of angry teenagers. The vagrant was an elderly man, a former engineer. He had found the broken scooter in some bushes. Likely a hooligan had stolen it from the owner to ride around and had wrecked it along the way. The old man found all the necessary parts and resurrected the broken scooter, then gave it to Cornelio as a token of gratitude. The new owner accepted the gift with joy. He took care of it, making sure the battery was in good condition, and regularly charged it using a car battery he had found or at charging stations in the city whenever he ventured out. Now, he planned to use it to reach Rollo's home, hoping the charge would last. He put a leash on Rocky and set off. He rode slowly so that the limping dog wouldn't get too tired. The journey was a long one. He wouldn't have made it by bike, let alone on foot. Cornelio rode along the edge of the highway, oblivious to everything around him, the cars, the people who curiously glanced at the odd pair from the windows of passing vehicles. Rocky obediently trotted behind his owner, and Cornelio tried not to rush, so the dog wouldn't strain his injured leg. Finally, they arrived at the street, at the house. It was clearly an expensive residential complex, evident at first glance. The cars parked around were not cheap either. Fortunately, the gate was open, otherwise, they might not have been able to get in. But luckily, the ground floors here housed some private kindergartens, fitness clubs, and other facilities, so the gates were left open for clients from other streets. Sweating and struggling, Cornelio lifted the scooter and started climbing the steps to the entrance. Beside him, Rocky limped along quietly, seemingly subdued and surprised. He had clearly never visited such elite complexes before and didn't quite understand why they were there. A woman with a child exited the building and immediately wrinkled her nose in disgust upon seeing Cornelio and his large dog. She hurried to close the door behind her, but Cornelio put his hand out to stop her. As soon as he entered the building, actually, more like the grand lobby, given how spacious, bright, and beautiful it was, he was immediately confronted by a new obstacle in the form of the concierge, who even stood up in her glass booth as soon as she saw the pair enter. "Hey, who are you here to see?" asked the young, thin, stern-looking woman with an unfriendly tone. She knew perfectly well that this man couldn't be a resident, nor even a relative or friend of anyone living there. Filled with an inexplicable confidence, even audacity, Cornelio casually replied, "I'm Rollo's cousin. Just passing through. Don't mind my appearance, I just got back from a hiking trip in the Altai Mountains. Caught a bit of a cold. Rollo said you'd give me the key." "I don't believe you," the woman said. "He would have told me." "Really?" Cornelio smirked, not even knowing why, and the suddenly saddened concierge sighed wistfully. "Yes, you're right," she responded in a completely different tone. "He never greets me, only talks to me when he needs something, and he always forgets my name. Of course, he remembers your name. He said Liliana would give you the keys," the impostor lied nonchalantly. "See? What did I tell you?" the concierge sighed. "I'm not Liliana, I've always been Juana," she said, handing over the keys through the window. "Thanks," the bum forced a smile and took the keys, then asked, "What floor is it on?" 17th, the woman replied grumpily. "Lucky number." "I like it," Cornelio mumbled and stepped into the elevator. He found the apartment immediately. The lock opened easily. Once inside, he was left speechless. It was a modern apartment, furnished according to all the latest trends. A living room combined with a kitchen, a spacious bedroom with a huge bed, and a bathroom with a jacuzzi. Rocky immediately began to sniff around, while Cornelio collapsed onto the couch, exhausted, and either fell into sleep or simply lost consciousness. His weary body had spent its last strength on this journey. It was no joke. Just this morning he had been contemplating the afterlife, and now he was lying in a luxurious apartment on a comfortable couch whose cost he wouldn't even dare to guess. After an unknown amount of time in oblivion, Cornelio struggled to open his swollen eyelids and looked around the room with inflamed eyes, trying to understand where he was. Instead of the cramped cocoon of junk and rags, he was surrounded by the unusual spaciousness of a beautiful, clean apartment, and instead of the patchwork tent he saw every morning upon waking, he now gazed at a clean, high ceiling. Everything around was clean, with minimal furniture. Lots of glass, air, beauty, and expense. No, it was not a dream or a hallucination. He had indeed come here on the scooter with his dog, and he had indeed found a corpse in the fridge. His cough still tormented him, and his chest was racked with pain. He needed something hot to drink. Cornelio went to the kitchen area and was momentarily confused as he looked around. Yes, this guy liked gadgets, including kitchen appliances. A fancy coffee machine, a stove he didn't quite know how to operate, a dishwasher, and a bunch of other gadgets for making hot sandwiches, fresh juices, and more. Opening the fridge, Cornelio was almost moved to tears. It was packed with food. Grabbing the first thing he could find, he began to eat greedily, not even tasting it. Only later did he realize it was some sort of pastry with a spicy filling. He figured out the coffee machine in no time, made a fragrant cup of coffee, and drank it almost in one gulp, burning his tongue and throat. This made him cough even more. What an idiot I am, Cornelio shook his head. After satisfying his initial hunger, he made another cup of coffee. He took out some herbs, meat, found some bread, and made multi-layered sandwiches. He then sat at the table and hoarsely called for his dog. "Rocky, where are you, buddy?" From somewhere deep within the apartment, the sound of loud, heavy footsteps accompanied by the clinking of claws on the floor was heard. The dog ran into the kitchen, wagging its tail happily, and immediately received its sandwich, which it devoured in one gulp, though managing to spit out some of the greens. Starved, poor thing, Cornelio sighed. And thirsty, too. He got up, found a ceramic bowl, filled it with water, placed it on the floor, and watched as his four-legged friend drank eagerly. Sitting back down in the comfortable chair, Cornelio began to savor his breakfast. Suddenly, his gaze fell on the black mirrored surface of the oven, from which stared back a scruffy bandit with a tangled beard. For the first few seconds, Cornelio flinched in surprise, but then he realized it was just his own reflection. What a horror! How could he have sunk so low? If he had encountered someone like that on the street before, he would have avoided them. Now, he was that very shabby vagrant everyone steered clear of. After breakfast, he immediately went to the shower. The plumbing was also top-notch, and the shower was like something out of a spaceship. Shelves were filled with various bottles and jars, as if a girl lived here rather than a guy. But the scents of the toiletries were masculine. Overall, Cornelio realized right away that there was no woman living here. Rollo, or rather, had lived here completely alone. Otherwise, there would have been another toothbrush in the bathroom, but there was only one electric one, no women's slippers or robes, and a complete absence of cute little trinkets in the apartment. Everything was masculine, bachelor minimalism. Cornelio spent an entire hour in the shower. It felt like he couldn't get clean, and the tangles in his hair wouldn't untangle. He only left the shower when he felt weak and dizzy again. Wrapping himself in a towel, he went to the bedroom, climbed into bed, turned on the TV, and for the first time in a long while felt like a human being. Cornelio spent 3 days in Rollo's apartment, not leaving the place or even really exploring it. He moved from the bedroom to the kitchen and back, mostly lying in bed and watching TV. He ate, took frequent showers as if trying to wash away his past. In the kitchen, he found a medicine cabinet stocked with a vast assortment of various medications. Whether Rollo had been ill or just a hypochondriac was unclear. The medications were clearly bought in bulk, many still in their packaging. Finding antibiotics, cold remedies, and vitamins, Cornelio started swallowing pills, hoping for recovery. Everything seemed like a haze, as if it wasn't even happening to him. His mind was foggy. He couldn't think or analyze. He didn't care about many things that seemed simple. For example, where Rocky relieved himself. He only thought about this when the cheerful, well-fed dog jumped into his bed and left muddy footprints on the white sheets. "Hey, what's this, Rocky? Where did the dirt come from?" Still happily wagging his tail, the dog made it clear that he wanted the biped to follow him and lead him to the stairs, which Cornelio had noticed right away but had no energy or desire to climb. It was obvious that it was the way to the roof. Following Rocky upstairs, Cornelio found that the dog had led him to a winter garden filled with plants whose names Cornelio didn't even want to know. There were clumps of earth scattered on the floor. "Ah, I see," Cornelio said. "You found yourself a bathroom here. Just like a cat. But that's fine. I'm feeling a bit better now. I'll take you outside." Cornelio himself was surprised at how quickly good food and warm drinks had restored him. The dead man in the fridge, as cynical as it sounded, had become his salvation. His thoughts, however, were still as muddled as jelly, so he wasn't thinking about the apartment owner's corpse or whether Rollo might be missed or if someone might come looking. His phone was dead and not ringing, so there was no external concern. Cornelio wasn't even thinking about the crime that had been committed. He was consumed by a completely irrational selfishness that had given him permission to live in someone else's apartment. The man decided that if the police did come, if they arrested him and accused him of the murder, at least he would have spent his last days living like a human. He had no intention of staying in prison. Either he would die of illness or find a way to leave on his own. Deciding to take the free-spirited dog outside, Cornelio put on the first sportswear he found in the closet. The owner's clothes fit him well. He leashed the dog, took the elevator down, bypassing the discontented concierge, who immediately began asking why Rollo had been gone so long. "And he won't be coming back." "He's away," Cornelio lied. "Well, I didn't see him leaving with a suitcase," the concierge said. "Why would he need a suitcase?" the imposter asked. "How can you go on a trip without a suitcase? Or at least a sports bag? No, you're not fooling me. I have a feeling something isn't right here. I'm warning you, if Rollo doesn't show up in the next 2 days, I'll call the cops." "And on what grounds?" Cornelio scoffed. "On the grounds that I'm not just standing around in a skirt here. I keep an eye on things and need to know what's going on with our residents." "Understood, you're responsible, Juana." "I respect that." Cornelio praised the concierge and walked away from the building. Following him, the well-fed Rocky wobbled importantly. "You remembered my name," the concierge said quietly, but Cornelio didn't hear her. Moving slowly on weakened legs, the refreshed vagrant headed behind the building to find a spot for the dog. Directly behind the building was a small park with trees and a stream. It was so nice here, although there were quite a few people around. After some effort, Cornelio found a secluded spot, sat on the grass, and stared at the water while the dog explored the area. "Is that your dog?" a sharp female voice asked from behind him, clearly intent on causing a scene. "Yes, it is," Cornelio admitted. Turning to the voice, he saw an angry middle-aged woman. "Why is your dog so huge and dirty? And without a muzzle? There are children here, you know." "All right. We'll leave right now," he promised. "Exactly. Leave," the woman said, turning away and muttering under her breath, "Damn hipsters. They've really gotten out of hand." Cornelio stood up, called Rocky, and led him out of the park. The dog grumbled. He clearly didn't want to leave the wonderful place, but Cornelio ignored him, for something amazing had just happened. Firstly, he had been addressed as an equal, and he had been mistaken for a hipster rather than a bum or vagrant as usual. A dubious compliment, but it was better than the disgusted looks he had become accustomed to. On his way home, or rather back to Rollo's apartment, he bought medicine and some groceries. Surprisingly, he wasn't kicked out of the store. The cashier greeted him with a friendly smile and offered a bag. Out of curiosity, Cornelio tried paying with a card and was pleasantly surprised when the payment went through without a PIN request. Apparently, for small amounts, no confirmation was needed. Back at the apartment, he prepared food for himself and dumped a whole can of dog food for Rocky. After lunch, he dragged the resisting dog into the bathroom and washed him with expensive shampoos. The dog wasn't thrilled. It seemed the dirt stuck to his fur was precious to him as a memento. Irritated, Rocky shook himself off and, grumbling discontentedly, clicked his long claws on the smooth floor, leaving wet marks behind. "Hey, no mess. No jumping on the couch. You can lie there once you're dry, Cornelio commanded. Remember, this is someone else's apartment. When we get our own, you can do whatever you want. The dog grumbled in discontent and lay down on a rug, casting a resentful sideways glance. Meanwhile, Cornelio decided to inspect the apartment more thoroughly, examining every corner. Clarity was gradually returning, and he began to realize the strange and even frightening situation he was in. He had taken over the apartment of a man he had found dead in the fridge. The person was killed. Who, for what, and why was no one looking for him? The all-in-one computer on the desk and the closed laptop Cornelio had noticed a while ago. He tried to turn it on, but it was password protected and wouldn't work. Searching through cabinets and shelves, he didn't find anything noteworthy except for a considerable amount of money. But what he definitely didn't expect to find was a terrarium with a huge spider. Well, damn, Cornelio cursed when he realized the glass box wasn't empty but housed a massive, hairy creature with a swollen belly. What are you? At least don't eat me. The spider didn't respond, and Cornelio decided that the creature was probably just watching him. He should probably offer it something as a sacrifice. What do spiders eat? Otherwise, it might end up biting him, waiting for Cornelio to fall asleep. Rocky's thick fur had dried. The happy dog ran into the kitchen, searching for a snack, and Cornelio was struck by how beautiful the dog looked once it was cleaned up. The only problem was that fleas were still bothering Rocky, who kept scratching himself absent-mindedly. No, I need to see this through, Cornelio shook his head. I'll go get some anti-parasitic treatment. He himself was frequently bothered by lice. Washing his head with gasoline would solve the problem, but it would also leave burns. Then, an ingenious idea suddenly struck him. What if he got a haircut? There was a barbershop on the premises, and surprisingly, there was an available chair. The stylist, a fussy young guy, looked at Cornelio's lifeless hair and, painfully scraping the scalp with a comb, asked distastefully, "Do you have psoriasis?" "No, it's burns from kerosene. I was tortured by a gang because I know where the suitcase with the money is hidden." The stylist cut Cornelio's hair silently after that, giving him a fashionable haircut and tidying up his beard. Cornelio barely recognized himself in the mirror afterward. Passing by the concierge on his way back, he caught her surprised gaze. "Wow," she commented. "I'm shocked myself," Cornelio agreed. "It was about time, by the way. Serge always looks well-groomed. When is he coming back?" "I don't know, he's busy with his affairs," Cornelio shrugged nonchalantly and headed to the elevator. "Remember about the police," the concierge hissed ominously, but the mysterious tenant didn't even glance back. Back in the apartment, Cornelio treated Rocky for parasites, then looked at himself in the mirror again and was astonished by his transformation. This new life, though stolen and foreign, seemed to offer him a chance at rebirth. The mirror reflected a tired but quite handsome young man with a fashionable haircut and a well-groomed beard. His skin had improved, and his eyes were brighter. At that moment, he felt a pang of sympathy for the deceased Rollo. It was as if he had switched places with Rollo. It was he who should have ended up in the trash, while Rollo enjoyed life in his penthouse. But things had turned out differently, and Cornelio was definitely not to blame. His only fault was taking advantage of the situation. Underhanded, perhaps. But he had long since come to believe that people were often no different from animals, and only the strongest, cleverest, and most cunning survive in this world. And he had sworn to survive. Another week passed in the stranger's apartment. No one was looking for Rollo. One day, Cornelio remembered the phone he had found on the dead man. The device had long been dead, forgotten in the pocket of the trousers the former vagrant had worn when he arrived at the deceased's apartment. The neatly folded charger was in the drawer of the desk. When Cornelio plugged in the cable, the phone didn't respond immediately, as if it didn't believe it was finally receiving the long-awaited nourishment of electricity. Then the screen lit up happily, displaying the phone's brand name before the device booted up. For a while, nothing happened, until suddenly envelopes labeled YOLO began to appear on the screen, text messages. Cornelio couldn't open them because he didn't know the PIN code, but he could answer an incoming call that rang out just as the phone turned on. Hello? Cornelio answered unnecessarily. Who is this? A stern voice asked, identified as Yola. It's me, I. And where is Rollo? She demanded through the receiver. Cornelio abruptly ended the call, and immediately someone began to knock fiercely on his door. Startled by the unexpected sound, he felt his feet go cold. So it's finally here. The police are coming for me. His thoughts began to spin chaotically in his head, bouncing around like ping-pong balls. Run, hide, stay put, open it. No, jump from the 17th floor and end it all. While he stood paralyzed, the knocking on the door grew more insistent. Cautiously approaching the door, Cornelio heard a demanding female voice. Open up, open the door immediately, whoever you are, or I'll break it down. Cornelio felt he had to open it. He turned the door handle until it clicked, and a disheveled, curly-haired girl burst into the hallway. You? Cornelio said, astonished. You, the girl replied, equally surprised. It was Yolanda. The same journalist who had been the only one to stand up for Cornelio in court. What are you doing here? She asked, instantly shifting from a combative expression to one of confusion. I. It's a long story, Cornelio stammered. I'm not in a hurry. Tell me, where's my brother? Your brother Rollo? Yes. You'd better sit down, Yolanda. Your brother is dead. The girl's reaction was predictable. She was visibly shaken, her legs gave way, and she nearly collapsed. Rocky, keeping out of sight, watched as Cornelio helped her recover with some water. She then cried, covering her face with her hands, while Cornelio recounted everything from the moment he found the refrigerator to the present day. Once she composed herself, the girl said, You acted despicably, and the fact that fate has been harsh with you all these years does not excuse you. You understand that I have to call the police. I understand, Cornelio sighed. Only I won't, the girl said with a steely voice. Why not? He asked, surprised. Because I feel sorry for you. I know you didn't kill him. Rollo was eliminated by a powerful person. More importantly, by your enemy. My enemy? Yes, the one who sent you to prison for nothing. Our mayor? Yes. Rollo worked for him. He was involved in security systems. He discovered his dark dealings. Well, we already knew that, but he got hold of evidence. I knew it would end badly. I'm sorry, Cornelio sighed. Let's go, the girl commanded and headed towards the door. Where to? To the dump. We need to find the refrigerator. Together? Yes, for now. We'll move the body. We can't just leave it there. Are you out of your mind, Yolanda? Cornelio went pale. Where are we going to take it? How do you imagine that? I have a contact who is a forensic expert. We need to get the body to him for an autopsy. Then I'll know exactly how my brother died. Understand, the mayor has everything under control. I'm not sure any other examination would be reliable. Passing by the concierge's booth, Cornelio encountered the stern, cold gaze of the strict concierge girl, who immediately approached and called out to Yolanda, whom she clearly knew. Tell me, dear. Yolanda flinched at the address, as she and Juana were about the same age. Do you know this person? Is he really your cousin? I haven't decided yet, the journalist replied tersely and firmly pressed the door to leave the building. Is the dog coming with us? She asked outside, noticing the limping Rocky with his pink tongue hanging out. He's always with me, Cornelio shrugged. And it will be easier to search for the refrigerator with him. I was ill back then. My head was in a fog. I'm afraid I might not find it now. Yes, I can hear your cough. You need to do something about it. Have you seen a doctor? No. That's a mistake. Anyway, let's go. They got into the car and headed towards the city dump. Getting there was not easy. The area was guarded, but anyone determined to get in knew there were many ways to bypass the security. Upon arriving, Cornelio first found his makeshift tent. His heart ached with nostalgia and self-pity. He held his improvised home, made from trash and sticks, in great affection, even though it had only sheltered him from rain and cold. What a mess, Yolanda shook her head. They've ruined your life, Cornelio. Yes. And now they've killed my brother too, the girl sighed. Allowing Rocky to thoroughly sniff Rollo's mobile phone, Cornelio followed the dog as it hesitantly sniffed the air and ground. Several times Rocky went the wrong way, and Yolanda rolled her eyes, doubting the street dog's intelligence. But eventually, the dog found the right place. As soon as the journalist saw the refrigerator lying on its side, she rushed to it, and Cornelio, unwilling to see the corpse, reluctantly followed. It should be there, under that tarp and some pieces of foam. I covered it then, the vagrant tried to explain. How thoughtful, the girl retorted. She began to dig through the pile of junk with her hands, and Cornelio turned away, not wanting to see the remains. There's nothing here, Yolanda suddenly said, looking at Cornelio with confusion. What? It should be there. I didn't imagine it, Cornelio exclaimed and started helping, tossing aside pieces of tarp and film. It soon became clear that there was no mistake. Rollo's body had indeed disappeared. They returned home empty-handed. Yolanda went to take a shower and emerged with wet hair, no makeup, wrapped in an indigo-colored bathrobe. She acted as if she were at home, but she did not ask Cornelio to leave, as if his presence was somehow justified. The police won't help, the journalist said. Everything's been bought off or everyone's too scared. So we'll have to take matters into our own hands. First, let's check the computer. I don't think there's anything crucial there. Rollo wouldn't have left serious information in such an accessible place as his home computer. Still, there might be a lead. There's no password. You're mistaken, Yolanda replied and went into the hallway. She returned with a handbag from which she pulled out a mobile phone and a memory card. Impressive gadget, Cornelio approved. But your brother seemed to prefer old-fashioned phones. Right, the journalist nodded. And it's not a quirk. It's a precaution. Rollo got involved in serious and dangerous affairs, so he didn't trust anyone, only me, but he didn't tell me everything to keep me safe. But I do know the password to his computer. He trusted me with it and said that if anything happened, I'd have to handle it. Yolanda turned out to be an adept user and skillfully managed the computer. With physical access, she easily cracked the password, found hidden folders, and opened files, but she only shook her head and clicked her tongue. There was nothing useful, and many files were encrypted to the point of being incomprehensible. She spent several hours sifting through the files and was nearly exhausted. Do you want me to go through these files while you get some rest? Cornelio offered. Sure. I'll just go sleep in the apartment of my murdered brother, which is now occupied by a vagrant with a cough, she said with irritation. Cornelio stayed silent, and Yolanda felt guilty for her sharpness. All right, I'm sorry, she softened. No, you don't need to apologize. You've got a lot on your plate, Cornelio said in a conciliatory tone. That's true, but I must admit I was prepared for this turn of events. You know how many threats I've received personally. Oh. She waved her hand dismissively. I'm sure our city will be different if we can expose our precious mayor. Your brother was the same. He wanted justice, Cornelio speculated. Oh, no. Believe me, he wanted money and was fully aware of how serious the risks were. But he was sure he'd outsmart everyone. Unfortunately, he couldn't, just as I can't seem to defeat this cursed spider, Yolanda said irritably, and only then did Cornelio notice that she was playing a simple black and white game where you had to chase a giant spider out of a house, while the spider kept dodging and remained in the corner of the web on the floor. Did he write this? Cornelio asked. Yes, he used to develop games before moving on to security systems. One day, the mayor's subordinates asked for his services and provided all the resources to hack data. That's when he got explosive compromising material. Why wasn't he eliminated right away? Because Rollo wasn't an idiot. He operated anonymously, Yolanda sighed. Listen, don't you think the game is very strange and practically impossible to win? It seems like it wasn't made for entertainment. Don't you think? Yolanda froze, staring at the screen, then slowly turned her gaze to Cornelio and said, "Did you know you're a genius?" "No," he replied, bewildered. Jumping from her chair, Yolanda rushed to the spider's terrarium, pulled the hairy monster from its abode, and handed it to Cornelio like a kitten. "How's it going, little guy?" she said softly. "Cornelio, have you fed him?" "Yes, I caught insects in the summer garden," the man sighed. "Here, hold this," Yolanda said, shoving the spider into Cornelio's hands, and began rummaging through the terrarium while Cornelio stood by, trying not to faint from embarrassment in front of her. Instead of helping, Rocky pretended to be sound asleep. "Here!" Yolanda suddenly exclaimed, pulling out a small packet, which contained an even smaller packet, inside of which was a metal key with engraving. "What is it?" Cornelio asked, his voice trembling as he continued to hold the disgusting creature. Looking at Rocky, he realized the dog had no intention of rescuing him, pretending not to notice the spider in his owner's hands. "It's a key to a safe deposit box," Yolanda explained. "But it's useless without a plastic card with a QR code. Without it, the key doesn't work. And we don't even know which bank it's for. Another mystery." Yolanda, exhausted, let her arm drop in complete despair. "I have no more ideas," the girl sighed, taking the spider from Cornelio and placing it back in the terrarium. "Sorry for disturbing you, Luna," Yolanda sighed. "Luna? The monster's name is Luna? Don't worry. He's very cute and completely harmless. By the way, I gave him to Rollo as a gift." "Why?" Cornelio asked, genuinely surprised. "What else do you give someone who has everything?" "Fair point. Well, Yolanda, I think you really need to rest. I'll dig through the computer for you. Maybe I can find something." Cornelio spent the entire night staring at the screen. There was nothing on any of the devices that could be deciphered. Despite her promise to stay awake, Yolanda succumbed to sleep. Rocky curled up at her feet on the couch and snored loudly. Deciding to relax a bit, Cornelio turned on the spider game that Yolanda had been playing earlier. Winning was truly impossible. The objective was to drive the spider away with a broom, squash it with a slipper, or destroy it with spray and other tools. But the multi-legged creature skillfully avoided every threat. The game was starting to annoy Cornelio when he noticed something. "I can't believe my eyes," he said slowly. "Yolanda, did you see this?" "What?" Yolanda asked, rubbing her eyes. "Did you notice that the spider moves along a specific trajectory?" "What spider?" "Oh, in the game." "Yes. Look. I use the first tool, a slipper. I try to kill the spider, and it runs away. See, doesn't it look like a letter?" "Yes," Yolanda exhaled. "It's the letter C. Next tool. What do you see?" "A, then R, then L, and then A, Carla. Carla Larez, that's Rollo's girlfriend. But I seriously doubt she knows anything, since he never even brought her to the apartment." Yolanda shook her head. "What kind of relationship is it that he never even invited her to his place?" Cornelio shrugged. "I don't know what was between them. He didn't plan on having a family, but she wanted to get married. He often got angry with her. Then why did he date her? Well, she's beautiful. And why didn't she leave? I don't know. Rollo generally liked women." Yolanda spread her hands. "Yeah, I noticed how Juana, the concierge, is smitten with him. Anyway, if there's a phone number for Carla, we should call her. 6 in the morning. Let's call her a bit later. But this is urgent." Yes, and that's why it's important not to scare her off. I'm not sure what she knows, but it's in our interest to get her talking. Waiting until 9 in the morning to finally call Rollo's girlfriend was challenging. At last, the number was dialed, and Carla's melodic but tired voice answered. Hello? Carla. Hi, it's Yolanda. Yes, hi, the girl sighed. We need to meet urgently. It's a matter of life and death. I can't. I'm at work. My boss is strict, and I won't be able to get away, Carla replied indifferently. Carla, Rollo is dead. What? How? Carla could barely believe her ears. And that's what we want to find out, Yolanda said calmly, listening as Carla gasped, overwhelmed by the approaching hysteria. Maybe I will take some time off, Carla whispered with a trembling voice. She arrived, beautiful but modestly dressed. She should have lived differently with her looks, but she chose to live modestly, work a regular job with a low salary, and be in a relationship with a man who didn't value her. Or maybe he did, since he even encrypted her name in the game. Carla had red eyes and trembling hands. Cornelio handed her a glass of water, then another, and another. It seemed she was ready to drink an entire Niagara Falls. Finally, she calmed down and looked around. This is the first time I've been at his place. I know you had a unique relationship, Yolanda sighed. Yes. I loved him so much that I was willing to accept those conditions. I just existed in his life. I brightened up his free time when he wanted, and the rest of the time I was pushed to the background. Is that fair? No, Carla, Cornelio shook his head, blinded by the girl's beauty. No woman deserves to be treated that way. What a lovely handbag, Yolanda remarked out of the blue. Birkin? Are you crazy? Carla snapped unexpectedly. I don't have that kind of money. It's a regular Chinese bag. There should be a serial number inside, the journalist insisted. Yolanda, I don't think discussing the handbag is very relevant right now. Cornelio tried to be tactful and, catching Carla's grateful glance, gave a shy smile. He still couldn't get used to the fact that women didn't recoil from him in disgust. All right, let's get back to the point, Yolanda said. She was surprisingly calm and composed. Cornelio was puzzled, given that her brother had just died, and she had learned about it the previous evening. Yet, she remained calm and collected, able to keep her composure, or maybe she just didn't care. It was strange. Meanwhile, the victim's sister continued the interrogation. She inquired about their conversations, whether Rollo had shared any important information with Carla, or if he had said something that Carla might have overlooked but could prove valuable in their investigation. But no, Rollo had talked to Carla about trivial matters. They might have discussed a dish at a restaurant, a trip, or a movie, but nothing more. He hadn't talked about his work or made any future plans with her. Yes, he didn't spoil you, Cornelio sighed and again met the gaze of the beautiful girl with her large, sad eyes. I would have showered such a girl with gifts. You're a genius, Cornelio, Yolanda suddenly exclaimed. Carla, did he ever give you anything? Not really, nothing special. A toaster, a vacuum cleaner. Practical gifts, the journalist sighed. I recognize my brother. Oh, wait. He also gave me a pendant, honestly quite hideous, but he insisted that I wear it all the time. I didn't like it, but every time we met, I wore it to avoid upsetting Rollo. Now I'll keep it with reverence as a memento and wear it often to remember him. A pendant? Why didn't you say anything earlier? Is it with you? Yolanda exclaimed nervously, wringing her hands. Yes, Carla said, puzzled, and began rummaging through her fake handbag, eventually pulling out a silver spider-shaped pendant with a large black abdomen. As you can see, it's not my style. With trembling hands, Yolanda took the pendant and examined it from all angles. I need a magnet, she breathed out. A magnet? Cornelio asked, surprised. Yes. Please bring one. The man went to the kitchen and took the only magnet from the door of the chrome refrigerator. Yolanda snatched the magnet from his hands and immediately brought it close to the pendant. A barely perceptible click was heard almost immediately. "What's that?" Carla asked, unable to hide her surprise. The journalist didn't answer. She silently opened the pendant and pulled out a small plastic card. "This is the second half of the key," she breathed out. "We found the missing part." "How? Was it inside the pendant?" Cornelio asked, bewildered. "Yes," Yolanda nodded. "But how did you know?" "It's simple. This is my pendant. Well, I had a similar one when I was a child. It opened with a magnet. Rollo set it all up. He made sure that no one would figure anything out except me, you understand. He left a message for me." "So it's a key?" Carla asked with a changed voice. "But for what?" "For a bank safe deposit box, but I don't know what's inside." "I think it's compromising material on a very important person," Yolanda said, referring to the mayor. "He was her archenemy, and she was eager for him to finally pay for all his misdeeds. The city was overrun by the mafia, and no one could do anything about it." "And where's the other half of the key?" Carla asked. "I have it," the journalist replied coldly. "Thank you, Carla, for your help. Again, my condolences. We're in the same boat, having lost someone dear to both of us, but I promise you I will find the killer and make him pay for what he has done." Turning to Cornelio, Yolanda said, "Let's go to the bank, urgently." "Don't rush," Carla said slowly, rising from the couch. Her hand dipped into her bag for a couple of seconds and suddenly pulled out a real-looking gun. At least, it looked real. "What?" Yolanda couldn't believe her eyes. Cornelio's jaw dropped. Rocky, who was also watching the scene, tilted his head in confusion. "I won't repeat myself," Carla warned ominously. "But why, Carla? Where did you get a gun?" Yolanda asked, bewildered. "That's none of your business, darling," Carla snapped. Cornelio now looked at her with entirely different eyes. The poor, fluffy sheep who had lost her fiancé had suddenly turned into an aggressive panther, a predator ready to slit throats at any moment. "Carla, reconsider." "Please," the bum requested politely, but this only drew a scornful smirk from her. "Yes, of course, I suppose I'll stop," the girl said mockingly, but Cornelio was so stunned by the situation that he didn't even grasp what was happening. "Phew, I thought you were serious," the man said with relief, lowering his hands. "Hands up, you idiot," the girl snapped, shaking the revolver menacingly. "Damn, I was hoping it was really a joke," Cornelio muttered. "Enough. Yolanda, put both keys on that coffee table and step back," Carla ordered sternly. Reluctantly, the deceased's sister approached the table and placed both keys on its smooth, transparent surface. "Good girl," the beauty praised, baring her teeth in a predatory grin. "Now scram," she commanded. With her head bowed, Yolanda stepped back, while Carla continued to aim her gun at her opponents. "I could shoot you in the forehead and no one would hear a thing. The gun has a silencer. But that would deprive me of the pleasure of watching you, sweet Yolanda, struggle, fighting for justice and not realizing that the person you're up against is beyond your abilities." "I thought you loved Rollo," the journalist said thoughtfully. "That jerk? Have you lost your mind?" the beauty scoffed. Meanwhile, Cornelio met the confused gaze of Rocky, who didn't understand what was happening, and subtly winked at his four-legged friend. The dog raised one eyebrow, then the other, but didn't seem to get the hint. Unable to hold back, Cornelio whispered, "Attack, attack." At the silent question, Rocky nodded towards the girl with the gun. However, the dog either didn't understand or pretended not to, but laying his head on his front paws, he looked at Cornelio with a submissive gaze. Disappointed and feeling guilty, Cornelio looked up at Carla, who laughed triumphantly. "You are such idiots," she sneered disdainfully, stepping backward towards the exit while keeping her aim on Cornelio and Yolanda. "Goodbye, losers," she said, turning sharply toward the door and preparing to leave the apartment, when suddenly there was a dull thud, and the girl was thrown backward, hitting her head hard against the corner. Sorry. I didn't mean to," a frightened young man's voice came as he held a box in his hands. "Miss, are you okay?" he fussed, not noticing the gun that had fallen from Carla's hands when she fell. Cornelio was stunned by the sudden turn of events, while Yolanda quickly took action. She retrieved the gun and searched Carla's purse again, pulling out the keys. "Yes," she exclaimed happily, then added, "and it's a Birkin after all." "Who are you?" Cornelio asked, bewildered. "I'm the courier. Delivery for Rollo Velarde. Parts. He asked me to come by a few days ago, but then he didn't answer his phone. I decided to come up myself today, but the power was out in your building. I ended up walking up to the 17th floor and ran into the young lady here. What a coincidence." "You're the best courier in the world," Yolanda said with a smile. "I'll call an ambulance for her," the young man promised. "Call it, and also the police." "We don't have time," said the journalist and rushed to the staircase, as the power was indeed out due to an urgent repair. Cornelio followed her, and behind him came the loyal and brave Rocky, as long as there was no immediate threat. The bewildered courier was left alone with the unconscious girl. Jumping into the car, Yolanda put her hands on the wheel and, as usual, glanced at the mirror. Her eyes were blazing, her cheeks were flushed, and her hair was disheveled. Cornelio sat next to her, while Rocky settled into the back seat. To the bank, Yolanda commanded herself, burning with anticipation. Upon arriving at the destination, the three of them got out of the car and headed towards the entrance of the financial institution, which was located in a grand, old-fashioned building, though it was actually just a flashy new construction. "No dogs allowed," the pompous security guard informed them. "All right, Rocky. Wait here," Cornelio sighed, and the dog, grumbling in discontent, stayed by the entrance. When Yolanda presented the key to the falsely smiling manager, his expression noticeably changed, and he led the clients inside. "Please follow me," he said with an elaborate gesture, pointing towards a discreet door at the end of the hall. They walked down the corridor, then descended to the basement, passing several entrances, and finally reached the vault. "Here is your safe deposit box," announced the attendant. "Would you like me to open it for you, or do you prefer to do it yourself?" "By ourselves," Yolanda exhaled. "Then, if you don't mind, I'll leave you to it," the attendant said obligingly and left. Yolanda opened the safe deposit box and was initially stunned to find it empty. But then she noticed 2 tiny memory cards inside. Digging into her backpack, she pulled out a tablet and inserted the first card. The documents that appeared on the screen after opening one of the files made her break down in tears. "Thank you, brother," she sobbed. "What is it?" Cornelio asked in a whisper. "This is compromising material, the kind that no Titan could withstand. Our mayor is finished." She carefully put away the memory card and inserted the other one into the tablet. It was a video file featuring her brother. For the first time, Cornelio saw what Rollo Velarde had been like in life. There were no photographs of him found in his apartment or on his computer. "Hello, little sister," the young man began cheerfully, adjusting his glasses. "I hope you figured out my codes and that it wasn't too hard for you, since you're such a smart girl." Yes, I'm sure you're watching this video and not someone else because I made the clues for you." "Sorry, sis, but your brother was quite the rascal." "Yes, I blackmailed the great and terrible one and shamelessly stole his money. I could have given the compromising material to you to expose his schemes to the world, but I'm too greedy to pass up such opportunities. Besides, even if he's gone, another one will come, and you'll be fighting again. But as you can see, I miscalculated. Since you're standing here by this safe deposit box, well, it happens. No risk, no champagne. But you should drink up, sis, definitely drink up. The account details you'll find in one of the files have enough money to last you and your grandchildren. Or you can use the money for good deeds, as you see fit. If I were you, I'd keep it all for myself, but I'm a miser. Carla didn't tell you that I'm a tightwad. I knew who she worked for. She pretends to be a poor secretary stuck in a low-paying office, but I know how much her clothes cost. That girl works for our mayor, and he assigned her to me to extract information. Yes, they could have just killed me, but they needed to make sure I hadn't passed the information to a third party. It seems they finally decided to act harshly and killed me. Just don't cry. I lived well, and if I could go back, I'd do it all the same way. Why are you crying, Yola? And don't shake your head, I know you're crying. Well, tell me, wasn't I clever with Carla? She always carried that stupid pendant I insisted she wear, knowing she hated it. And she never guessed what important information she held. I hope she didn't give you too much trouble. Of course, I could have given you all the keys while I was still alive, but then all my blackmail would have gone to waste, since you'd use that information to restore justice. It's more important to you than money, isn't it? Yes, we're different, but I still love you, and I know you love me too. And one last thing, Yola, don't bury me, cremate me, and scatter the ashes over our old dacha. Sad, Cornelio said when the video of Rollo ended. Yes, the journalist said, wiping away her tears. But I have to see this through. Let's get out of here. She said this and headed for the exit. Not so fast, a sharp female voice stopped them, and the first thing Cornelio and Yolanda saw was a gun aimed at them. Again? Cornelio wearily quoted a colorful character from an old cartoon. Another girl with a gun. Cornelio didn't immediately recognize who was standing before them, but it was Juana, the concierge. Give me everything from the safe deposit box, the young woman said. I don't understand how you bypassed the security, Yolanda said calmly. It seemed nothing could surprise her today. That's not your concern. Hand everything over, or I'll have to use my weapon, Juana said sternly. But Yolanda didn't move. She had worked too hard to obtain this compromising material. It was the work of her life. Come on. I'm starting to get anxious, the concierge growled. Maybe we can make a deal? Cornelio suggested timidly. No, Juana cut him off. That's not an option. I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3. However, instead of a gunshot, there was a loud bark and a growling ball of orange fur lunged at Juana. The concierge fell, trying to protect her face and abdomen, while Rocky barked loudly once more and looked at Cornelio with a look that said, See? I'm not a coward and my food is well earned. Good job, Rocky, Yolanda cheered, patting the dog on the back. And how did you get past the security? She then turned to Juana and said, Well, darling, you lost? Another killer today. I'm not a killer, Juana sobbed. Oh? Well, the police will find out, the journalist said. But before she could finish her sentence, a man in his 40s burst into the depository. What have you done to her? He asked anxiously as he ran to Juana. Sorry, I couldn't do it, the concierge whimpered. Foolish, I've been telling you for a long time that you started an unjustifiably dangerous game, the man said as he hugged the unfortunate raider. What's going on here and where's the security? Yolanda asked. There won't be any security. This is my bank, the man admitted. Yours? Yes. You probably have a lot to tell us, Yolanda said. Exactly. So, please, let's go to my office. The secretary brought coffee with cookies and chocolates, and Cornelio and Yolanda realized they hadn't eaten anything that morning. Nevertheless, they had no appetite. We are husband and wife, the man confessed. We have no children, but we had a nephew who opposed the mayor and his gang when he wanted to demolish part of the old historical cemetery to build a shopping center with budget money allocated for a park. But our nephew couldn't withstand it and was found in the river. Juana mourned him like a son and decided to do everything to avenge him. I tried to dissuade her because even with all my money and connections, I was powerless. But somehow, she reached Rollo, your brother, as I understand now. She knew he wouldn't provide her with compromising material and wouldn't be able to oppose the mayor, so she decided to simply keep watch, becoming a concierge in his house. The plan for obtaining information was supposed to develop later. "So, you're the good guys?" Yolanda asked, sounding childlike. "Yes," the man nodded. "Then why did you point a gun at us?" "Good should be accompanied by force," Juana said sternly. "Sometimes, yes, but sometimes it only causes harm," Cornelio said thoughtfully, recalling how he had defended a girl years ago and had spent a long time behind bars. With the combined efforts of the banker, they ensured that the compromising material ended up in the right hands, and the mayor was disgracefully sent to prison. It was a very high-profile case. Even his son was implicated in several offenses, including the possession of illegal substances. Rollo's body was found. It had been hidden by the mayor's people when they returned to search for the body again, because they had shown up empty-handed. The programmer was buried as he had requested, and his ashes were scattered over the old summer house. An important chapter in the book called Life had turned. A whole stage had ended, and Cornelio wondered what he would do next. Tender female fingers tentatively squeezed his hand, and he met the gaze of the journalist's large, restless eyes. "I think I'll take a break from investigations and live a little for myself," she said. Buying a house by the sea, all three, Cornelio, Yolanda, and the Shaggy Rocky, finally found their happiness, if only temporary, for nothing in our world is eternal.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the